Professor Chomsky, welcome to Activism Munich.
Thank you.
So let's get straight to the interview. In your book in 1998, which you wrote called Manufacturing Consent, the Political Economy of the Mass Media, you talked about 5 institutional filters that control and alter the flow of information that serve certain interests in our society. Could you talk about these institutional filters and whether they have strengthened or weakened in our current period?
Well, first of all, there was a later edition of that book in which my co-author Edward Herman and I wrote a new introduction, and we pointed out that one of the 5 filters was too narrow, the 5th one. With back writing in the 1980s, we called the 5th filter anti-communism, but it should have been much more general. There's always some invented enemy which is about to destroy us, which we have to defend ourselves against. And commentary and analysis and news selection is shaped to support the state propaganda and action against this real or imagined enemy. And for a long time, it was the Soviet Union. And it's quite interesting to see what happened. You learn a lot about propaganda and scholarship by looking at what happened when the Soviet Union collapsed. That's the best way to learn about the Cold War. What happened? 1990, no more Soviet Union. What happens? Well, first of all, what happened to NATO? NATO was established to protect Western Europe against the Russian hordes, theoretically. No more Russian hordes. What happened to NATO? Was it dissolved? No, it expanded. It expanded to the east, now right to the Russian borders. Now there's a threat, even a threat of global war because of Ukraine. And meanwhile, the mission of NATO was formally changed to protect the international energy system, sea lanes and pipelines. So it's a global system and also a global intervention force run by the United States, which tells you what it always was and tells you something about anti-communism as a propaganda device. Next thing that happened, a couple of weeks after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the United States invaded Panama, killed hundreds, maybe thousands of people, bombing the slums, all in order to kidnap someone who the U.S. didn't like and who was finally tried for crimes, most of which he committed on the CIA payroll. Well, that's kind of normal. One difference, they couldn't appeal to the Russian threat because there's no Russian threat. So it was Hispanic narco-traffickers who were about to destroy us. Okay, that lasted for a while, didn't work very well. Then you have to invent new pretexts. The Middle East is a very interesting case. This is Bush #1. The Bush administration immediately had to issue a new national security strategy after the fall of the Russians. And what it said is pretty much everything will go on as before, but with new pretexts. With the Middle East, it said, we must maintain the intervention forces aimed at the Middle East. And then came a very interesting phrase, where the serious threats to our interests could not have been laid at the Kremlin's door. In other words, we've been lying to you for 50 years. It's not the Russians. It's what they call radical nationalism, independent nationalism. But we still need the intervention forces to crush that. And so it continues. Everything goes on, but with new pretexts. Well, that tells us that our 5th filter was misstated. It's not anti-communism. It's whatever pretext is invented to justify continuing processes of global intervention, of subversion, of force, of international treaties to support the interests of domestic capital and so on. That's the 5th filter. Now, going back to your question, all of them are operative today.
In September of this year, the US announced that it will be sending around 20 new type of B-6112 nuclear bombs here in Germany at the Büchel Air Base. Each of these bombs has 80 times the explosive power of the nuclear bomb that exploded in Hiroshima. And most notably, German taxpayers will cover 1/5 of these costs. Do you think that Germany is violating Article 1 and 2 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which it ratified, I think, in 2003?
Well, these treaties are somewhat vague in their formulation, so whether it's an explicit violation is a kind of technical question. The more important question is, should Germany be doing it? And in my view, absolutely not. The existence of nuclear weapons is a major threat to survival. If you look over the record of the past 70 years, it's a virtual miracle that we've survived, literally. There are a number of times when the world has come literally a few minutes from a terminal nuclear war. So in 1979, for example, there was the US automated response systems had detected what they determined to be a Russian attack. The reaction should have been a preemptive nuclear strike on Russia. The National Security Advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, was virtually on the telephone to tell the president, authorize a nuclear attack, when information came in saying it was a false alarm. In 1983, a couple of years later, the Reagan administration was carrying out simulated attacks against Russia to test Russian defenses. Operation Able Archer, it was called, including nuclear threats. The Russians took it pretty seriously, it turns out. And there was we now know that it was a real war scare. Right at that time, the Russian automated systems detected what they took to be an American missile attack. The protocol was there was a single human being named Stanislav Petrov, who was supposed to take those reports, hand them over to the high command, in which case there probably would have been a preemptive strike. He just decided not to do it. And that's why we're here talking about it. And there are many other cases like that, including real adventurism. Cuban Missile Crisis, others, complicated story. But to maintain these systems is, at every moment, raises the possibility of a serious nuclear attack. And remember, an attack by any major power will destroy the attacker, even if there's no response, because of the effects of nuclear winter. It's been understood for decades. So to try to increase these threats is grotesque. They ought to be reduced, not increased, if we intend to survive. And now is a period of considerable tension where something could break out over Ukraine, maybe over Syria, and so on. The expansion of NATO to the borders of Russia after the Soviet Union collapsed was, I think, a serious error of policy, not just error, it's understatement. And it's a large part of the problem that's leading to the Ukraine confrontation now. This, incidentally, was in violation of verbal promises, not written ones, but verbal promises to Gorbachev, who thought that the unification of Germany would mean no expansion to the east. It was not the US view. So these are really dangerous developments, I think.